My stepbrother forged my medical reports to exclude me from our family trip, but when I checked his laptop, I found years of lies, a secret addiction, and $50,000 stolen. I sent him to prison for 5 years, and now he's begging for forgiveness. I'm 23 years old. I study medicine, and what happened a few months ago with my stepbrother basically destroyed my family in a way I never thought possible. I guess I should start from the beginning. When my mom married my stepdad after divorcing my biological father. I was like 8 years old, I think. And honestly, my stepdad, or I mean, the one I now just call my dad, was the best thing that could have happened to us. He's a doctor, a super kind and caring guy, and from day one he treated me like I was his biological daughter. Ryan, his son, was the same age as me, and at first I thought it would be great to have a brother, someone to grow up with and share things with. Things were pretty normal during those first years. Ryan and I went to the same school. We played together. We fought like normal siblings. Those things. But everything changed when my mom got sick. Stage 4 cancer. It was horrible. Like one of those things you don't wish on anyone. Watching her deteriorate day after day while my dad did everything humanly possible to save her, taking her to the best specialists, trying every available treatment. Nothing worked. She died when I was 14, and honestly, I thought my world had ended. The only good thing, if you can even call it that, was that my dad immediately started the process to legally adopt me. He told me, "Emma, you're my daughter and you always will be, no matter what happens." I cried like never before that day, and Ryan was there too, hugging both of us. At that moment, I thought we were a real family, facing tragedy together. The high school years were weird. My dad worked a ton. I think it was his way of processing the grief, and Ryan and I spent a lot of time alone. I focused on my studies because I knew I wanted to be a doctor like my dad. I wanted to help people the way we couldn't help my mom. Ryan was different. He was always more social than me, more of a party person, let's say. He went out a lot, had tons of friends, and honestly, I didn't pay much attention to what he was doing. Each doing our own thing. You know what I mean? Fast forward to like 2 years ago. We both applied for medical school. I studied like crazy, like I was sleeping 4 hours a day for months, and I passed the entrance exam on my first try. I was super proud of myself, and my dad cried with happiness when I told him. He made a special dinner and everything. Ryan, however, didn't pass. He tried to play it cool about it, saying it wasn't a big deal, that he'd try again. But I noticed something weird in his look that night, like resentment. But I thought I was just being paranoid. Anyway, he said he'd take prep classes and try again. Things between Ryan and me started getting tense after that. Nothing obvious, but like he avoided talking to me, and when he did, he was short, kind of sarcastic. My dad didn't seem to notice, or maybe he was just too busy with work and with me starting medical school. I tried to reach out to Ryan, several times, asking him how his studies were going, if he needed help, but he always rejected me. It's fine, I thought. Everyone processes failure in their own way. Like 6 months ago, my dad announced he'd planned a family vacation to Cambodia. He'd always wanted to go, and he said it would be perfect for the three of us, a time to reconnect as a family now that I was so busy with school. Ryan seemed excited, which surprised me because lately he'd been in a bad mood constantly. I was excited too, honestly, because I'd been doing nothing but studying and sleeping for months, and the idea of a vacation in an exotic place sounded amazing. But then, like 2 weeks before the trip, Ryan showed up one day at dinner with some papers. He looked worried, like genuinely distressed, and he told my dad he needed to talk to him in private. Obviously, I thought it was weird, but I didn't say anything. After like half an hour, my dad came out of his study with a face I'd never seen on him, like somewhere between worried and devastated. He sat down with me in the living room and said, "Emma, there's something I need to tell you. Ryan found some medical reports of yours that apparently I had ordered a few months ago, and the results aren't good." I froze. Medical reports? I hadn't done any medical tests recently. I asked him what he was talking about, and he showed me the papers Ryan had brought. They were super detailed reports that supposedly showed I had a serious heart condition, something about dangerous arrhythmia that could get worse with the stress of the long flight to Cambodia and the altitude or something like that. I sat there reading these papers thinking, what the hell? I felt perfectly fine. I'd never had any heart problems, and my dad had never mentioned that he'd sent me to get these tests done. I told him all that, and he looked confused too. He said he didn't remember ordering those specific tests either, but that the papers had his signature and the stamp of the hospital where he worked. Ryan was standing there with a worried face, saying he'd found them accidentally in Dad's study while looking for I don't know what thing, and that he felt he should say something before the trip because if something happened to me in Cambodia, he'd never forgive himself. Such a good brother. Right? My dad decided we couldn't risk it, and that I would have to stay while he and Ryan went. I got angry, obviously. But at the same time, I was scared because those papers looked super legitimate and my dad is a doctor. If he said it was dangerous, who was I to argue? They left for Cambodia, and I stayed home feeling like crap. Not only was I missing the vacation, but apparently I had a heart condition I didn't know anything about. I called my best friend and told her everything, and she said something that hadn't occurred to me. Emma, if you really have a heart problem, don't you think your dad would have immediately taken you for more tests or to a specialist? Why? Would he just leave you home and go on vacation? That made me think. She was right. Wasn't she? If it was that serious, my dad would be much more worried. He would have canceled the entire trip. He would have taken me to see other doctors. The more I thought about it, the less sense it all made. I decided to investigate. I made copies of the medical reports my dad had left in his study and started analyzing them. I'm a medical student, you know, and although I'm not an expert, something didn't add up. The numbers were weird. Some ranges didn't match the normal standards I'd studied, and the terminology in some parts was like outdated, let's say. Also, the date of the tests was from like 3 months ago, but I remembered perfectly that 3 months ago I was in the middle of my final exams, and I definitely hadn't gone to any hospital to get tests done. So I did something I probably shouldn't have done, but I needed answers. I went into Ryan's room. I'd never done it before. Like we respected each other's privacy, but something told me I had to check. And there, on his laptop that he'd left open, because apparently the genius didn't think to turn it off before going on vacation, I found a file called Medical Report Draft DocX. I opened it and I literally felt like my heart was going to jump out of my chest. It was a draft of the same medical reports they'd shown me, but with comments and edits all over the place. Things like, change this number to make it look more serious, and add Dad's signature here. I couldn't breathe. Ryan had forged the medical reports. My own stepbrother had created fake documents, so I'd be left out of the Cambodia trip. But why? Just to have alone time with Dad? Did he hate me that much? I kept searching on his laptop. I didn't even care about invading his privacy at that point, and I found things that made me feel physically sick. There was a digital diary, and when I say diary, I don't mean those cute things like, Dear Diary, today was a good day. No. This was pages and pages of debts, names of people who sounded dangerous, amounts of money he owed that were ridiculous, $15,000 here, $20,000 there. Ryan had a gambling addiction, and it wasn't new. According to his own diary entries, it had started in high school, betting on poker games with friends, then it progressed to illegal casinos, then online sports betting, and by the time he got to college, he was completely out of control. But here comes the part that destroyed me. Ryan had left college after his first year. All this time, for the last 2 years, he'd been lying about going to classes, studying, trying to get into medical school. It was all a lie. He'd been using the money Dad gave him for tuition and expenses to pay gambling debts and bet more trying to recover what he'd lost. And it got worse. There were recent entries where he talked about how much he hated me, how I was the perfect daughter who had stolen his father's love, how if he didn't exist, he wouldn't have to compete with me, how Dad clearly loved me more because I'd passed the medical exam and he hadn't. He said that forging the medical reports had been his way of having a trip alone with his father, of reminding him that he also had a biological son who deserved attention. But there was more. There were plans to borrow money from relatives, to sell things from the house, to basically do whatever was necessary to pay the lenders who were threatening him. I sat in his room for I don't know how long, just processing all of this. My brother, the guy I'd grown up with, who I'd cried with over my mom's death, was a complete stranger. A liar, an addict, a manipulator. And the worst part is I hadn't seen anything. How did I not realize? How did Dad not realize? I copied everything. Every file, every photo of documents, every diary entry. I saved it all on my own laptop and on a USB, because I knew that when Dad came back from Cambodia, he'd need to see this. The next few days were the longest of my life. I couldn't concentrate on studying. I barely ate. I just thought about how I was going to handle this situation. Part of me wanted to call Dad immediately and tell him everything, but another part thought I should wait until he came back to confront Ryan in person. When they finally returned, like a week later, Ryan looked tan and relaxed. Dad also seemed happy, saying they'd had an amazing trip and that he was so sorry I hadn't been able to go. Ryan hugged me and asked me how my heart was, if I'd had any problems while they were gone, with that little worried face that I now knew was completely fake. I told him I was fine and that we needed to talk, all three of us. We sat in the living room and I just let it out. I told Dad that the medical reports were fake, that Ryan had forged them. Ryan immediately started denying it, saying I was crazy, that I was jealous that they'd had a good trip without me. But I pulled out my laptop and showed Dad the files I'd found. I watched my dad's face change from confusion to horror to fury in a matter of seconds. He asked Ryan if it was true, and Ryan, seeing himself cornered, finally admitted that yes, he had forged the reports. He tried to justify himself, saying he just wanted alone time with his father, that lately everything was about me and my achievements, and that he felt invisible, that he just wanted Dad to remember he also had a biological son. Dad looked devastated, like literally had tears in his eyes, asking Ryan how he could do something like that, how he could use his profession and his trust that way. And then I said, "There's more." I showed him everything else, the diary, the debts, the fact that he'd left college. Ryan went pale. He realized I knew everything, absolutely everything about his secret life. He tried to explain, saying he had a problem, that he needed help, that he was so sorry, but Dad was too angry and hurt. He told Ryan to leave the house, that he needed time to process all of this. Ryan left without saying anything else, and I remember Dad and I just sat there in silence for hours, just trying to understand how we'd gotten to that point. I thought that was the worst that could happen. I was wrong. Ryan went to stay with his aunt on his mom's side, his biological mom's sister. She didn't know anything about what had happened. Ryan told her some story about a family fight. He stayed there like a week. And then she called us hysterical, saying Ryan had left and had stolen the emergency money she kept in her house, like $3,000 she had saved. He disappeared in the night without saying anything, taking the cash and some small jewelry she had, but it didn't end there. A few weeks later, we got a call from Ryan's grandparents, my dad's parents, who lived in another state. They were confused because Ryan had visited them and had shown them some documents that were supposedly Dad's will, where apparently Dad was leaving. Everything to me and nothing to them. Ryan had told them this whole elaborate story about how Dad had forgotten them, how I had manipulated Dad to give me everything, and that he was trying to protect them and help them. The grandparents, who are elderly and trusted their grandson, gave him a check for $50,000. $50,000 that Ryan cashed immediately and disappeared with again. My dad was devastated in a way I'd never seen. His own son had betrayed him, had stolen from his family, had manipulated his own grandparents. Dad did something I never thought he'd do. He posted on Facebook a warning about Ryan, saying that if anyone in the family or friends received contact from him, not to give him money or trust anything he said, because he was a scammer and had a serious addiction. It was brutal but necessary, I guess. We went to the police and filed a formal complaint for theft, forgery of documents, and fraud. The legal process was long and complicated. First, Ryan was briefly arrested for attempted home robbery. It wasn't even our house. He'd tried to rob some random neighbors, but that charge was dropped because apparently there wasn't enough evidence. But then, with all the evidence we had from us, the aunt, and the grandparents, the formal charges were for fraud, theft, and identity theft against family members. The trial was horrible. Seeing Ryan there, on the stand, trying to look repentant, while the aunt and grandparents testified about how he'd manipulated them. Dad also testified, and it was one of the hardest things I've seen in my life. A father having to testify against his own son. Ryan was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 5 years in prison. 5 years. After the sentencing, Dad went to visit him in jail. Ryan finally told him everything. How the gambling addiction had started in high school with small bets. How it had escalated out of control when he entered college. How he'd lied and stolen to keep the secret. How the lenders threatened him constantly. He said he never had the courage to ask for help because he was too scared and ashamed, and that every time he tried to stop, the addiction was stronger. I'm not sure if I believe he really means it or if he's just saying what he thinks we want to hear, but I guess it doesn't matter much at this point. Like 6 months ago, recently, I received a letter from Ryan, from prison. It was long, like 10 pages, asking me for forgiveness for everything. It said he'd been going to mandatory therapy for the addiction, that he was finally clean and facing his real problems, that he understood that I hadn't stolen Dad's love, but that he had destroyed that relationship himself with his actions. He apologized for the fake medical reports, for the things he wrote about me in his diary, for all the pain he caused. He said he didn't expect me to forgive him, but that he wanted me to know he was sorry. Honestly, I don't know how I feel about it. Part of me is still furious with him, for everything he did, for how he destroyed our family. But another part of me, the part that remembers the kid I grew up with before everything went to hell, feels sadness for him. Addiction is a disease, you know? I don't justify anything he did, but I understand he was sick, and that illness led him to make horrible decisions. I decided to visit him in prison like a month ago. Dad didn't want me to go. He said Ryan didn't deserve my time or my compassion, but I felt I needed to do it for me, not for him. When I saw him there, in the prison uniform, he looked so different. Thinner, older, more tired. We both cried. We talked for hours about everything, about Mom, about how things got derailed, about his addiction. It wasn't a magical reconciliation conversation where everything was forgiven. But it was. I don't know. Necessary, I guess. I told him I couldn't forgive him yet, that it was too recent, and that he'd hurt too many people too much. But I also told him that if he was really committed to his recovery, when he gets out in a few years, maybe we could try to rebuild something. I don't know if we'll get there, honestly. I offered to help him with educational resources in prison, things he could study to have a second chance when he gets out. He accepted, and I think he really wants to change. Or at least that's what I want to believe. Dad still can't talk about Ryan without getting emotional. He says he feels like he failed as a father, that he should have seen the signs, that if he'd been more present, maybe none of this would have happened. I tell him it's not his fault, that Ryan made his own decisions, but I know he's going to carry that guilt for a long time. Our relationship, Dad's and mine, got stronger after all this. We appreciate more the time we spend together, and he tells me constantly how proud he is of me, not just for medical school, but for how I handled this whole situation with maturity. The grandparents recovered part of the money through the legal process, but not all of it. The aunt also recovered some. The relationships are tense, obviously. The family split a bit. Some think Ryan deserves another chance, and that 5 years is too much. Others think he totally deserved it. I'm somewhere in the middle. I think he did terrible things and deserved consequences, but he's also a human being who needs help. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd gone on that Cambodia trip. Would I have discovered everything eventually? Would Ryan have escalated to worse things? I guess I'll never know. What I do know is that situation taught me that you really never completely know people, not even the people you grew up with. And it taught me that forgiveness is complicated. It's not just deciding to forgive and everything's fine. It's a long and difficult process that maybe never completely ends. I'm still in medical school, still working hard to become a doctor. Sometimes I think about specializing in addiction psychiatry. Maybe what happened with Ryan pushed me in that direction. I want to help people like him before they get to the point where they destroy their lives and the lives of the people who love them. I don't know. Maybe it's my way of making sense of this whole mess. Last week, Ryan called me from prison, one of the allowed calls he has. He told me he'd finished his first online accounting course, that it felt good to be able to learn something productive. He thanked me for helping him enroll and for not abandoning him completely. I told him I was proud of him for taking those steps. And it was true. They're small steps, but they're something. When I hung up, I realized that maybe, someday, we could be something resembling a family again. It won't be the same. It'll never be the same. But maybe it can be something. And for now, I guess that's enough.